We have to hope that they still view this as an opportunity and that people still want to come and travel to Alaska for the latter half of that season.
The U.S. Senate passes a bill that could allow cruise ships to return to Alaska this summer. From Alaska Public Media, this is Statewide News on Alaska News Nightly for Thursday, May 13th. Good evening, I'm Casey Grove. Also tonight, a conversation with the former Alaska journalist behind the true crime series Sasquatch.
I'm up here tromping around in the woods in pretty dangerous country, just thinking that I'm glimpsing something through the trees,
Those stories and more tonight on Alaska News Nightly.
Alaska News Nightly is brought to you in part by your local public radio station.
The 2021 Spring Statewide Virtual Job Fair is happening now through May 31st. Free and open to the public, this job fair is hosted by the Alaska Department of Labor and Workforce Development and the Alaska Job Center Network. Have an electronic copy of your resume and professional references available, and check the website often, as employers will be added weekly. Visit jobs.alaska.gov and click on Virtual Job Fairs. This message sponsored by the Alaska Department of Labor.
United Way of Anchorage reminds you that you have until August 15th to enroll in ACA health insurance for 2021. And that coverage is more affordable than ever thanks to additional financial help from the American Rescue Plan. Get connected with the United Way Healthcare Navigator to learn about new options, expanded eligibility for savings, and for free help enrolling. Call 211 or text Get Covered AK to 898211. This message sponsored by United Way of Anchorage.
The U.S. Senate passed a bill today that could allow cruise ships to return to Alaska this summer. Alaska Public Media Washington correspondent Liz Ruskin reports.
The bill temporarily lifts the required stop in Canada for foreign cruise ships, which comprise nearly the entire fleet. It passed in a largely empty chamber.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Murkowski amendment at the desk be agreed to and the bill as amended be considered read a third time.
Is there objection?
Senator Lisa Murkowski says if all goes well, the cruise lines could return to Alaska in mid or late July.
We have to hope that they still view this as an opportunity and that people still want to come and travel to Alaska for the latter half of that season.
The bill must pass the House, and Murkowski says the Alaska delegation is still working on the Centers for Disease Control to amend its pandemic restrictions on cruise ships. The Senate-passed bill adds a temporary bypass to the Passenger Vessel Services Act. That's a 19th century law intended to favor domestic fleets. It says a foreign vessel can't carry passengers between U.S. ports. Foreign-flagged cruise ships get around it by making a stop in Canada on voyages between Washington State and Alaska. Last year, with the pandemic raging, Canada stopped allowing it. There's a lot of work ahead if Alaska is going to salvage part of its cruise season, and it's not entirely in Washington, D.C. Murkowski predicts a scramble in Alaska port towns for workers and shop inventory.
There's been so many moving pieces here that we've had to kind of cobble together, and I'm feeling much better today than I have in weeks about the viability for a semblance of a cruise season this summer.
Murkowski says she's optimistic the bill can pass the House. The Alaska delegation has already quelled objections from senators who don't like protectionist laws like the Passenger Vessel Services Act, and with others who wanted to see concessions from the cruise industry to protect consumers. Some of that work should allay similar concerns held by House members. Reporting from Washington, D.C., I'm Liz Ruskin.
Governor Mike Dunleavy announced this afternoon that there will be 2 upcoming special legislative sessions. The first 30-day session would begin on May 20th, the day after the regular session ends. It will focus on finishing work on the state budget and on a constitutional amendment intended to protect the Permanent Fund's earnings reserve, permanent fund dividends, and a fund lowering rural electricity costs. Dunleavy said in a statement late this afternoon that it was clear that more time is needed based on his conversations with legislative leaders. He said, quote, "Nothing is more important than giving Alaskans a long-term solution to our fiscal challenges, and this session is an important first step," end quote. The second special session would begin on August 2nd. Dunleavy is directing the legislature to work on constitutional amendments to limit spending and to require a vote by Alaskans before new taxes can be instituted. It would also consider potential bills to increase state revenue and to spend federal relief funds. Some Ketchikan businesses have shut their doors and community events have been canceled after emergency officials raised the community's pandemic risk level to its highest level. As KRBD's Eric Stone reports, the rise in COVID-19 infections is disrupting everyday life.
Oh, it is not free. It is not free.
All aboard.
You have to have the excitement in your voice.
Schoenbar Middle School students are standing with Dean of Students Kelly Smith in the gym, trying to get to the bottom of just how many times Ozzy Osbourne laughs in the beginning of his hit song, Crazy Train. They're coaching Smith for his role in the Schoenbar Band's end-of-year concert. Music director Jamie Carlson, who leads the Schoenbar Band and Choir, says she's been eagerly anticipating the event.
I've been really looking forward to this opportunity for months since we started planning it, because for many of my students, this was going to be the first time they get to perform for a real audience.
Was is the key word there. Because of a spike in COVID-19 cases in the Ketchikan area, the concert, like so many other things, had to go virtual. Carlson says that when she heard the local pandemic risk level was rising, leading school officials to cancel many in-person events, it was tough news.
Oh man, tears. Literally. I had a few crying spats at home. Don't tell the kids that. I'm trying to be strong. It was a big bummer.
She says performing in front of a video camera just doesn't compare to a room full of people.
Some of them have not had that experience, which I think is so important for the performing arts, to get to feel that energy from a live audience, and it's just been a different year for that.
With the rise in COVID-19 cases in Ketchikan, the band concert isn't the only event going virtual. The annual Totem to Totem Half Marathon quickly pivoted from an in-person race to a virtual time trial, where runners run at their convenience and report their times. Dancers at Ketchikan Theater Ballet recently streamed their recital online from an empty high school auditorium. And Ketchikan's hospital is tightening restrictions on visitors, says Jennifer Kolenko, the rehab services manager for Peace Health Ketchikan Medical Center.
At this moment in time, we are restricting all visitors in the emergency department, urgent care, and the hospital. There are some exceptions. One designated visitor may be allowed for labor and delivery, pediatric, cognitively impaired or disabled, and end-of-life patients.
She says the restrictions are aimed at making sure patients are able to seek medical care without putting themselves at risk of catching COVID-19. She says hospital staff are happy to help patients and families set up video chats, but Kolenko says some things just don't translate.
You know, if you're going in for an ultrasound and you have a new baby and you want to share that with your spouse, that would be a change. That kind of thing is really hard. You can't really replace that with technology.
Hospital officials say Ketchikan's daily case rate would have to fall by at least half before the policy is liberalized. Kolenko says the best way to make that happen is to follow health officials' advice.
You know, we've been dealing with this since last year, and I think it can be hard sometimes to not become complacent with some of these recommendations. You know, we just need to hang in there.
That means masking up in public places, keeping distance, avoiding crowds, and washing hands.
And then, of course, last but certainly not least, and very importantly, to consider vaccination. And I think in order to see these things change, we really need to do a combination of all of these things.
Back at the middle school, 7th grade trombonist Amuk Bullock says he's a little disappointed that his friends and family can't cheer him on in an auditorium.
But then again, it could have been like, oh, well, this person gets COVID. Well, that sucks because we just had a concert. So it could have been from that.
Plus, Bullock says he's glad his out-of-town relatives can watch him play Crazy Train online.
All aboard!
And he and the rest of the band can count themselves lucky that they got to perform at all. The middle school's choir concert, which was just a few days away, is now on hold after another new case of COVID-19 was discovered in the middle school. Reporting in Ketchikan, I'm Eric Stone.
Still to come on Alaska News Nightly, an ice jam causes flooding and evacuations in Buckland.
We never had a flood like this over 20 years. The water gotten high in the past, but not this bad.
That's ahead. Stay with us.
Alaska News Nightly is brought to you in part by your local public radio station.
The 2021 Spring Statewide Virtual Job Fair is happening now through May 31st. Free and open to the public, this job fair is hosted by the Alaska Department of Labor and Workforce Development and the Alaska Job Center Network. Have an electronic copy of your resume and professional references available, and check the website often, as employers will be added weekly. Visit jobs.alaska.gov and click on Virtual Job Fairs. This message sponsored by the Alaska Department of Labor.
Today was the first full day adolescents as young as 12 years old were eligible for one of the COVID-19 vaccines in use. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention gave final authorization for providers to administer the Pfizer vaccine to youth aged 12 to 15 yesterday. Alaska Public Media's Lex Trinan visited a clinic in Anchorage to find out how it's been going.
There's the usual sounds of a COVID vaccine clinic outside an Anchorage UMed midwifery on Thursday, but there's also this.
Oh, she's got the giggles. Got the nervous giggles.
Wait, don't do it yet. Just calm down.
You heard about your sister.
Josephine Wheat is 12 years old and getting her first shot. She has to stop giggling before she's still enough that the doctor can insert a needle into her shoulder.
My laughing to deflect panic attack is really great radio, I'm sure.
To be clear, she says she wants to get the vaccine. She says it will help her life as a middle schooler at Romig feel a little more normal.
I'm going on a couple soccer tournaments, and we're going to Costa Rica pretty soon, so the vaccine is great, like weird.
Her sister, 15-year-old Lucy, was also excited.
Yeah, I thought I was going to have to wait till my birthday in July when I turned 16, but I was really excited to get it earlier.
She says they don't really have any friends who don't want to get vaccinated.
I think it's more parents that don't want their kids to get it, but I know that most of my friends have gotten it or are getting it soon.
Data isn't yet available for how fast 12 to 15-year-olds are getting vaccinated after it was approved on Wednesday. At least at this clinic, there's plenty of demand for it, though. Claire Norton-Cruz, the business manager at Geneva Woods Birth Center, says once the approval came through, she posted on their Facebook page that they'd be offering the vaccine.
It filled up in about 3.5 hours. 46 spots is what we had.
Meredith Durson is next in line. She was supposed to go to school as a freshman at West High. Instead, she decided to stick to online Zoom classes this year. But it's been hard to make friends.
You just kind of meet some people like online Zoom and kind of thing where you're like maybe we should hang out in person. And then it's like, well, after we're vaccinated, we can.
For brothers Trevor and Elliot Beck, the stakes are even higher. With some family members who are at high risk for serious COVID, they've been foregoing in-person school as well. And they've been taking other precautions.
I think me and my brother went to a store for the first time, or at least for him, like a few weeks ago in over a year. So we've been really keeping it like low-key, not really going out, and it just hasn't been the same. Like, I've never lived like this before.
But Beck says he's confident he'll get back to school next year with the help of the community.
Hopefully, if enough people get the vaccine, maybe things will go back to completely normal.
He still has a few weeks before his vaccine reaches its full effectiveness, but he says at least he'll have some peace of mind. Reporting in Anchorage, I'm Lex Trinan.
Retired commercial pilot Dave Bronson is ahead by 627 votes in the runoff race for Anchorage mayor against East Anchorage Assembly member Forrest Dunbar. That's according to updated election results posted this afternoon. The margin between the two candidates is still less than 1%, but it has widened since yesterday, when Bronson was up by less than 300 votes. Results will continue to be updated as the election center processes ballots. Almost 81,000 votes have been counted so far. The election center will continue to receive mailed ballots over the next week and a half. The final results will be certified by the Assembly on May 25th. Warming weather has led to flooding in the northwest Arctic borough village of Buckland. As KOTZ's Wesley Early reports, an ice jam on the Buckland River is preventing the rising water from flowing out.
Buckland Vice Mayor Nathan Headley Jr. says he noticed water in the community began to rise Wednesday night.
Around maybe 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, I was cooking a late dinner, and I can see the ice is moving through the river really fast.
Hadley says minutes later, the water started gushing from the Buckland River onto the land.
Got my hip waders and started moving my children's motorcycles, snow machines, my truck, the side-by-side, bring them to a higher ground, and came back and deal with the things around my house that I needed to save.
Hadley says the community has seen flooding in the past, but it hasn't reached this level for years.
We never had a flood like this over 20 years. The water gotten high in the past, but not this bad. So it's been a while, and we were basically not ready for it.
Hadley says the city of Buckland and the local tribal council have been coordinating with volunteers to assist community members by boat. He says he hasn't heard any reports of injuries, and volunteer responders are working to secure homes so they don't float away. Incident Commander Raymond Lee Jr. says they have 7 boats on hand for rescue efforts.
2 houses evacuated, and the 3 of them, they were ready to evacuate, but they put everything up there and the water didn't go in their house, so they were okay.
Lee says there are 2 different evacuation locations for residents, one of which is for people who are in quarantine due to COVID-19 safety mandates.
The old blue building is for the people that are in quarantine, post-quarantine, and the ones that are not in quarantine, they are all going to head to the gym, to the school. There's 7 homes that are in quarantine.
Buckland is about 75 miles southeast of Kotzebue, with a population of over 400 people. Right now, ice is jammed on the river below Buckland, and Hadley says that will need to clear up for the flooding to slow down.
Below Buckland, if that part of the ice breaks up, then the water will have a place to go.
Hadley says the water levels have been steady through Thursday morning, but he anticipates more gushing once the temperatures get warmer later in the day. The National Weather Service has a flood warning in the community through Saturday morning. With help from KOTZ's Nicole Edmondson, I'm Wesley Early in Kotzebue.
A bill introduced in the Alaska Senate would require schools to designate school-sponsored athletic teams or sports as male, female, or co-ed, and require participation in a female sport to be based on a participant's sex assigned at birth. The bill from Republican Senator Shelley Hughes is the latest of its kind around the country that would bar transgender girls and women from girls and women's sports. Less than a week remains in this year's legislative session, but bills that are pending are carried over to next year. The executive director of an Anchorage-based advocacy group for the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community calls the bill discriminatory. The president of the conservative Alaska Family Council called the measure a way to ensure fairness.
Alaska News Nightly is brought to you in part by
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, proud of its ties to Prince William Sound communities. How does the sale of a land parcel help support criminal justice reentry programs in Alaska? The Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority has a responsibility to generate revenue from its land assets and the resources they contain. The trust uses the revenue from its land to fund programs that directly impact the lives and circumstances of Alaskans with mental health conditions and disabilities, including criminal justice reentry programs. Learn more at alaskamentalhealthtrust.org. This message sponsored by the Alaska Mental Health Trust.
RVs provide a more COVID-safe way to travel, but the pandemic has increased demand for them. At the same time, it's backed up manufacture of motorhomes, travel trailers, and other mobile camping gear. As KUAC's Dan Bross reports, it's difficult to buy or rent an RV in Alaska these days.
Long a popular way to explore Alaska, RVs are an especially hot commodity in the 49th state right now. Oscar Ingold at Arctic RV in Fairbanks says the business has exploded.
Last year, we sold every unit that we got in, and we actually could have sold more if we could have got them. This year, it's no different. Matter of fact, it's probably worse. Right now, we've got 32 units on order, and we can't even get them in. They haven't been able to deliver them because they're backlogged on making them and delivering them.
Ingold points to an Alaska-specific pandemic-related factor driving up demand.
Because there's not as many tourists, a lot of the locals are wanting to go out and enjoy some of the sites without the crowdedness of some of the more common areas like Valdez.
In the past, an online search could turn up plenty of used RVs for sale, but Ingold says that's no longer the case.
We've got people coming in every day looking for either new or used units, which we don't have. And basically anything they find on Marketplace or Craigslist, if it's anything at all, if they hesitate, it's gone before they even have a chance to go look at it.
The rental market is also tight. Steve Spencer and his wife started Alaska Road Adventures, a small-scale RV rental business in Fairbanks 2 years ago, and he says things have really taken off during the pandemic.
Because of the COVID, we expected it to be down. It was actually up because it was a good way for people to travel and kind of stay isolated and so forth. It was mostly in-state people that we rented to. This summer, it's both in-state and out-of-state, and it's exponentially stronger.
Spencer says the 2 motorhomes they have rent for about $250 each a day and are booked for all but a few weeks through September. He says they plan to expand the rental fleet as soon as they can get additional units. Alaska is normally a magnet for RVers driving up from outside, but the U.S.-Canada border closure has shut down that traffic, leaving only one real option for getting a motorhome north: shipping it.
We run a twice-weekly service between Tacoma, Washington, and Anchorage, Alaska.
Alex Hofling is Vice President and Alaska General Manager for Tote Alaska, a marine cargo shipping company. Hofling says Tote has long shipped RVs north, but started marketing the service more to the public last summer.
Our goal was to raise awareness of the capabilities of Tote and that, Alaska is still a really good destination.
Hofling says they moved more than 100 RVs last summer and hope to double that this year. He says it costs about $4,000 to ship a 30-foot RV to Alaska and about half that to ship it back. Drivers and passengers have to fly. In Fairbanks, I'm Dan Bross.
The true crime miniseries Sasquatch on Hulu is part murder mystery and part monster hunt, and it centers on the idea of chasing an enigma that the closer you get to it seems to slip farther and farther away. Sasquatch is the work of former Alaska journalist David Holthouse, who says traumatic events early in his life growing up in Anchorage set him on a path of finding and exposing monsters of all kinds. And a warning, this conversation includes a mention of sexual abuse. That's something Holthouse has written about in his story Stalking the Boogeyman, which was adapted into a play and a radio piece for This American Life. But Sasquatch is the search for a different type of monster, which Holthouse says starts with a scary story circulating among illegal cannabis farmers in mid-90s Mendocino County, California.
And the story goes like this, that 3 guys were murdered on a weed farm in the fall of 1993, and they were murdered by a Sasquatch, a Bigfoot. Once you get past the initial ridiculousness of that story and you start looking for the how and why, and were 3 men actually murdered, and if so, what was the motive, and how did the story get twisted up that Bigfoot did it, that's what the show is about, is trying to untangle all that.
The myth of the Sasquatch sort of works in this search for the truth, right?
The truth was elusive, okay? And one thing I figured out the hard way is you go up to northern Mendocino County and start asking questions about unsolved homicides from the early 90s, which was a particularly dangerous era up there. You pretty quickly find yourself, or I pretty quickly found myself on the trail of at least 2, if not 3 different multiple homicides that have gone unreported, let alone, being solved. But as I started to zero in on the one that was the genesis of this Bigfoot story, and at a certain point, I started to realize, like, am I doing the same thing that all these self-declared Bigfoot hunters do, which is I'm up here like tromping around in the woods in pretty dangerous country, just thinking that I'm like glimpsing something through the trees, and it started to feel like a quest to a place that had no end, right?
Yeah, it's like the truth is so elusive, it might as well be a Bigfoot or something. It's like you're chasing a shadow, it seems like, the whole time. And
right. That's exactly right. I started to feel like I was tracing shadows. Like there was some substance to the shadows, but I was never going to get a clear picture of exactly what had happened. All I was going to get was impressions and shadows.
So you've done a lot of journalism, and I know maybe this is a big question, but how did you end up getting into a position in your career as a journalist to put this series together? I mean, what led up to that in your interest and just in your I don't know, in your career to be in the right place to do this?
Well, to make a show like Sasquatch, you've got to be comfortable around criminals, and they have to be comfortable around you. And that's been a facet of my personality and a strength for the kind of reporting and journalism that I practiced like pretty much my entire life. That's always been the case. Like I've felt comfortable. That's not to say that I've always felt safe, but I've always felt comfortable, and I've always felt at home in navigating criminal subcultures and underworlds, whether it's, gang culture in Phoenix or dope growers in Northern California or bikers or whatever, man.
And I wanted to ask, is there anything specific to growing up in Anchorage and Alaska that sort of informed who you were going to be as a journalist?
Well, there's a specific life experience that I had. I've been very out front with this, which is I was sexually assaulted when I was 7 years old. And that pertains to Anchorage only in the sense that, sexual assault rates of children and adults in Alaska are horrifyingly high and have been going back a long way, certainly going back to the late 70s when it happened to me. Anchorage is still a place for me with a lot of ghosts. It's a place that I'll always consider home, but it's a place that whenever I'm there, there's a lot of ghosts, and it's a tricky place for me to navigate. So that experience, that didn't really become clear to me until I was in my early 30s, that what I was doing with journalism was basically like trying to hunt down and unmask monsters because I saw the person that had sexually assaulted me as a monster. I mean, that's who he was in my 7-year-old vision of the world, was the boogeyman, an evil and hurtful creature, right? So it took a while for me to realize that I'd been chasing down and trying to destroy monsters pretty much my entire life and with my entire career.
Yeah. And thanks for being willing to talk about that.
No, I'm happy to talk about it because when I was a kid, it wasn't talked about, and so I thought it was just something that had happened to me and I was like a freak of some kind, So the fact that it's talked about more, and it's talked about more in Alaska and, in the country as a whole is great. There's still a long way to go, obviously, but I also just think the more people who are high functioning adults can sort of out themselves as being survivors of childhood sexual assault, the easier it will be for the survivors of childhood sexual assault who are still children and adolescents right now and who might be listening to this, right? Just to know that there's getting through it. There's another side to this.
That was David Holthouse, executive producer of the true crime series Sasquatch. Find that on Hulu and more of Holthouse's work at davidholthouse.com. And that's all for this edition of Alaska News Nightly. If you missed any of tonight's stories, we're online at alaskapublic.org and wherever you get your podcasts. We had reports tonight from Liz Ruskin in Washington, D.C., Andrew Kitcheman in Juneau, Eric Stone in Ketchikan, Lex Trinan and Kavitha George in Anchorage, Wesley Early in Kotzebue, and Dan Bross in Fairbanks. Our audio engineer is Ammon Swenson, Maiwa Ina is our producer, and I'm Casey Grove. Good night.
Alaska News Nightly was made possible by
Alaska Air Cargo, connecting 21 Alaska communities to and from the lower 48 with scheduled shipping services. More information at alaskacargo.com. Alaska USA has been on a journey with Alaskans since their first member account was opened in 1948. They'll be with you every step of the way through the challenges of today and the hopes of tomorrow. AlaskaUSA.org. This message sponsored by Alaska USA.
This is Statewide News on Alaska Public Media.